I've asked you to take action against TfL wanting to build on a park. My question is for the Mayor. Will you agree with Marsha de Cordova MP, Dame Meg Hillier MP and Daniel Francis MP and pause the implementation of floating bus stops until new national guidance is published?
So I met with some of the MPs that the member refers to last week and explained what TfL are doing, but more importantly what DfT are doing in relation to some of their concerns in relation to this. So TfL are working closely with DfT in relation to the new design guidance. What TfL are also doing is looking at those boroughs which have, inverted commas, the floating bus stops to make sure they follow the design guidance. What we discovered during our review was some of those floating bus stops haven't followed the design guidance, so we're rectifying that. If we were to pause, then those corrections, rectifications couldn't be made. So there isn't a pause of the work TfL are doing. What TfL are doing, though, is ensuring that they're working with DfT in relation to the new guidance that DfT will be issuing, which isn't. There are two types of floating bus stops, and just important to distinguish between the two. DfT is reviewing one of the types of floating bus stops, not the other.
So the guidance isn't there yet, but still you're putting in floating bus stops?
No, there is guidance for floating bus stops.
National guidance for
there is national guidance in relation to floating bus stops. There is.
But there's new national guidance being developed, but you don't want to pause advance of that.
There are two types of what the public call floating bus stops. For one of the types of floating bus stops, the guidance is quite clear from DfT. For the other type, what Lord Hendy has done is pause, and that's the work TfL is doing with DfT. And
so you're going to pause the implementation.
Correct. So for those types of bus stops, there are no bus stops being installed.
Do you think that the Westminster floating bus stops are usable by blind people?
I'm not sure of the specific. It depends if they followed the TfL
For example,
guidance.
Westminster Bridge.
So it depends if they followed the guidance. So, as I said, the review undertaken by TfL showed some of the floating bus stops hadn't followed the guidance. Where they haven't followed the guidance, we're working with the councils to make sure they do. As you'll appreciate, a lot of the roads aren't owned by TfL, they're owned by the council. So yes. It's the council that installs the floating bus stops.
Yes, but specifically, can you write to me about Westminster Bridge floating bus stop? That's the source of many complaints from blind people. I mean, do you think floating bus stops are usable by blind people?
It's a general question. In general terms, yes. Some have caused problems for those who are visually impaired.
And you think they're usable, but blind people don't think they're usable. Do you know best?
I think some visually impaired people and groups have expressed concerns about some bus stops which TfL, DfT and others are seeking to address.
And will you take those floating bus stops out, therefore?
I think the points that have been made by a number of people, visually impaired people, cyclists and others, are being addressed by not just TfL, but the DfT as well.
So you're not going to take any action about the concerns of blind people who are now no longer using those bus stops and have to take detours?
I think in relation to the concerns raised in London by visually impaired people, TfL in their review spoke to a number of groups, including individuals who aren't members of groups, about the concerns they had. There's now an action plan to address some of the conclusions of the review, which have been taken forward by TfL, working closely with groups that include those that are visually impaired, as well as cyclists and others as well.
Thank you. I now have another question. Doesn't today's announcement from Westminster Council about proposals to pedestrianise Regent Street demonstrate that local councils are perfectly capable of coming up with their own locally appropriate proposals without you taking away their powers?
I welcome Westminster Council's announcement today with Crown Estates. I just say in a respectful way, the member's one of those who's regularly asking me to take action against Enfield Council, and just to pick one at random, and others on a regular.
I have never done that. I have never done that.
Basis.
Seriously, that's what the action I've asked from you. I could perhaps couldn't Westminster have already come up with its own local proposals for Oxford Street, fully funded and locally supported, as they have done for Regent Street? They could have done that on their own, couldn't they? In fact, they have done that on their own.
So the plans to make part of Regent Street St James's pedestrianised, I fully support, and I think it's fantastic news, will complement our plans to pedestrianise Oxford Street, which is a very different proposition to the great news today from Crown Estates and Westminster Council.
Thank you. Assembly Member Mohima.
Thank you, and good morning to both of you. My first question is to you, Mayor Khan, around the Bakerloo line extension. So we've already heard today about the spending review and it delivering a multi-year settlement for TfL around capital investment so that we can replace tube trains and buses. But unfortunately, there weren't any commitments to fund the Bakerloo line extension. So I'm just wondering if there are any alternatives that you're looking at in terms of funding mechanism to build the extension.
Well, firstly, just to remind the colleague that we consulted on a new bus route, the Bakerloo, which will serve from Elephant and Castle to Lewisham later on this year. So, as part of the business plan work the Commissioner's doing, one of the things that I've asked them to look into is whether there is scope for some feasibility work in relation to the business plan TfL are working on to take the Bakerloo line extension forward. Just to remind colleagues and to remind those from Treasury who may be watching this, that a Bakerloo line extension could lead to 50,000 new homes, 20,000 plus would be a direct consequence because of the extension. And if the Treasury mean what they say about getting more homes built across the country and growth, then I think they should be supporting new infrastructure like the Bakerloo line extension.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and just, the homes across Southwark, Lewisham and Bromley would be really, really welcome alongside all of the jobs that would come with that extension. So I wanted to ask you then what the role of the Bakerloo line extension and other sites, other projects like the West London Orbital and DLR extension, what that means for unlocking new sites across the capital.
So what the DfT have been quite clear about in relation to one of the three propositions we had in relation to the DLR extension. So the government is saying they support the DLR extension, and they even recognise the potential housing and economic growth that would be stimulated by, for example, the DLR extension. They've asked TfL to work on a full business case. My criticism is there's no funding so far being provided by the Treasury. The same goes for the Bakerloo line extension and the West London Orbital. They're supportive of these schemes, and want TfL and us to do some further work, which is great, and we'll do the further work. My criticism is there should have been cash in the SR to give some confidence. The good news, West London Orbital will really benefit the business community. Really benefit events in those particular parts of London. The councils there have been fantastic in terms of their support for the preliminary work in relation to West London Orbital. And the same goes for the Bakerloo line extension. Southwark have been fantastic in relation to supporting us with the Baker Loop and so forth. And so, my unhappiness is there was no additional support financially from the Treasury on all three of our schemes.